It is my honor and privilege to introduce you to my favorite author, humanitarian, and mentor, Dr. Rudolf Steiner. I like to start by reading his biography that you would find on the back of his book, The Tension Between the East and the West. During the last 2 decades of the 19th century, the Austrian-born Rudolf Steiner, 1861 to 1925, became a respected and well-published scientific, literary, and philosophical scholar, particularly known for his work on Goethe's scientific writings. After the turn of the century, he began to develop his earlier philosophical principles into an approach to methodological research of psychological and spiritual phenomena. In 1913, he founded the Anthroposophical movement, under the aegis of which he continued research out of his trained seership for the renewal of the 20th century society. Steiner's multifaceted genius had led to radically new, holistic approaches in medicine, science, education through the Waldorf school system, religion, economics, history, agriculture, architecture, drama, and other fine arts. Now, in this book, which has to do with Asia, Europe, and America within a threefold world community, they write that this challenging set of 10 lectures attempts to lift the veil from modern social and spiritual problems as they can be experienced in the contrasting modes of life of the East and West. The first half of the book considers modern dilemmas within the fields of natural science, psychology, and history, and suggests unexpected solutions for these. Science, by ascribing to human thinking only a shadowy, subjective validity, makes unreal the very faculty that gives us our human dignity. But at the same time, this very unreality of thought images makes possible an inner freedom that scientific doctrine tends to deny in principle. The need arises from these contradictions to extend the limits of ordinary scientific thinking to new investigative faculties. This can be achieved in a healthy modern way, Steiner explains, through 2 types of meditative exercises, very different in character from older paths to higher knowledge, such as yoga and aestheticism. These principles lead to the discovery of a paradoxical truth. If you would know yourself, look into the world. If you would know the world, look into yourself. The spiritual scientific philosophy thus presented provides a framework within which the second half of the book considers how a healthy social life can be understood and shaped. Today, the old social instincts of humanity have grown uncertain, and the rational intellect is proving unsuited to comprehend and foster a humane social life. While admitting we are only at the historical beginning of discovering the right relationship between individuals and community, Steiner describes how a conscious spiritual life is able to give the same social certainties as did the earlier instinctive life. He then explains how we might find a way from our highly developed sense of personal self into the worldwide social organism. Now, guys, he was writing this 100 years ago, and it's so modern in its concept of what we are experiencing right now. That is going to be a subject that we are going to explore in depth on today's show of awakening to community, because that will be the thing that completely brings the new paradigm into focus. I'm starting with some incredible words here of Steiner's. But the moment we awake, we begin to take some part in communal life. The space we and those around us occupy is the same space. The feeling and impressions they have of it are the same we have. We wake at hand of our immediate surroundings to the same inner life another wakes up to. In waking out of the isolation of our dreams, we awaken, up to a certain point at least, into the community of our fellow men, simply as a result of the way we are related to the world around us. We cease being completely to ourselves, shut in and encapsulated, as we were absorbed in our dream world through our dreams. May have been beautiful, sublime, and significant. But how do we awaken? We awaken through the impact of the outer world, through its light and tones and warmth. We awaken in response to all the various impressions that the sense world makes on us. But we also wake up in ordinary, everyday life in the encounter with the external aspects of other human beings, with their natural aspects. We wake up to everyday life in the encounter with the natural world. It wakes us out of our isolation and introduces us into a community of sorts. We have not yet wakened up as human beings by meeting our fellow men and by what goes on in their innermost beings. That is the secret of everyday life. We wake up in response to light and tone, and perhaps also to the words someone speaks in the exercise of his natural endowment, words spoken from within outward. Let's move that staple. Ordinary everyday life, we do not wake up in the encounter with what is going on in the depths of his soul or spirit. We wake in the encounter with his natural aspects. The latter constitutes the third awakening, or at least a third condition of soul life. We awaken from the first into the second through nature's impact. We awaken from the second into the third at the call of the soul spiritual element in our fellow man. But we must first learn to hear that call. Just as a person wakes up through the natural world surrounding him in the right way in everyday life, so do we wake up rightly at a higher level in the encounter with the soul spirit of our fellow men, as we sensed light and tone on awakening to everyday life. We can see the most beautiful pictures and have the most sublime experiences in our isolated dream consciousness, but we will scarcely be able to read, for example, unless highly abnormal conditions prevail. We are not in a relationship to the outer world that would make such things possible. We are also unable to understand the spiritual world. No matter how many beautiful ideas we may have garnered from anthroposophy, or how much we may have grasped theoretically about such matters as etheric and astral bodies, we begin to develop an understanding for the spiritual world only when we wake up in the encounter with the soul spiritual element in our fellow man. That is where the first true understanding of anthroposophy sets in. Yes, it is indeed necessary to base our understanding of anthroposophy on what can be called a waking up in the encounter with the soul and spirit of another person. So, Mr. Vic, we were talking on break about what Steiner defines as the soul. I was wondering how that all resonated with you.
I'm still not clear exactly how he, and again, I'm working from my mind right now, so if I probably would be better off answering this, as from a different level of perception. But from what I can say is that uh, to me, soul goes far beyond the mind in the sense that it's in the area of being. And being itself, you can go beyond being into existence itself. And so I get the impression that what he's trying to do is with the anthropos, anthropos.
Philosophy, yes.
I'll get it. That's a mouthful there.
Yes.
And what he's saying, I'm looking at it right now, is that he's trying to bridge the science of spirit and the existence of things like soul and then the human consciousness, so that he can then explain more deeply the workings of what some would call the truer realms. It's very good stuff. I like where he's going with this. I don't know the man. I sincerely appreciate you being the vehicle by which this has been expressed to me. But the way I see it is that namaste, my dear, and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to be able to view things in that perspective. Because what we need today, at least I need in my reality, is a greater mixture of the understanding of the science as we know today, which would include the quantum field,
Yes.
and everything else, with what he's talking about. And I think that's what he's probably really saying, is that we are experiencing now the quantum field combined with a lot of these religious teachings and tenets that they were unable to do before because the consciousness was simply unevolved. It wasn't mature enough to grasp something like the quantum field. And so, yeah, it's all stuff. Actually, I get kind of my hairs on my arms are rising because there's just so much energy flowing through. But it's true. I love it. It's very beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. Well, let's continue because you have grasped it already with a collective consciousness of an anthroposophist. And we're going to see now where Steiner, because he worked with his heart brain so extensively, he was always trying to find the right word to bridge these different groups of people together. So he's a man after my own heart. I feel like we all resonate for this reason together at this time. And as far as Gnostic goes too, I fully agree. Yes.
Well, I studied when I was in my former path. There was a gentleman by the name of Paul Twitchell who this sort of reminds me about, because what he referred to his teachings as the ancient science of soul travel. And so he was trying to bring in this philosophy, this anthroposophy, in such a way that at the consciousness of that time, we were back in the late 60s, early 70s, and he had to do was invent or plagiarize certain terminology that he learned in his teachings over the years. And so rather than call God, he would say it's now Sugmat, M-A-D. And then you go, well, what's Sugmat? And of course, this goes back into the Hindu traditions and so forth. But he basically defined God as the ocean of love and mercy, and that we are drops within that ocean. You see? So
confirmation of spirit, and that comes up later in the presentation, no doubt. Yes. Let me keep reading, Vic.
By all means.
Okay. This becomes the illuminating inner experience that one can have on projecting will into one's thinking, one has to look at thinking this way when in accordance with mankind's present stage of evolution, one searches for the source of ethical and moral impulses in pure thinking. Then one has the experience of being lifted by pure thinking itself out of one's body and into a realm not of the earth. Then one realizes that what one possesses in this living thinking has no connection whatsoever with the physical world, but is nonetheless real. It has to do with a world that physical eyes cannot see, a world one inhabited before one descended into a body, the spiritual world. One also realizes that even the laws governing our planetary system are of a kind unrelated to the world we enter with enlivened thinking. I am deliberately putting it in an old-fashioned way and saying that one would have to go to the ends of the planetary system to reach the world where what one grasps in living thinking has its true significance. One would have to go beyond Saturn to find the world where living thoughts apply, but where we also discover the cosmic source of creativity on Earth. I am only giving you a sketch of these matters today because I want to characterize the third phase of anthroposophy. One comes to enter the universe from its opposite side, the side given its external character by the physical moon. The moon repels rather than absorbs sunlight. It leaves sunlight just as it was by reflecting it back from its surface, and it rays back other cosmic forces in a similar way. It excludes them, for it belongs to a different world than that gives us the capacity to see. Light enables us to see, but the moon's rays back the light, refusing to absorb it. Thinking that lays hold on itself in interactivity carries us on the other side as far as Saturn. Laying hold on our will leads us to the other side into the moon's activity. We learn to relate man to the cosmos.
Mm-hmm. That's very good. Yeah, the whole thing of the moon and what it represents is like goes back for thousands of years, probably since the beginning of consciousness of the planet. The thing that I think you have to be aware of is that when we think about things like the moon and the teachings that he's talking about here, is that some people take it as a cult, because the moon represents to some people the Saturn or satanic forces that are out there. But that's okay. The thing to keep in mind is that this world was never, and I believe this with all my heart, this world was never meant to be heaven.
Right. Yeah.
It's like you can't take a child to a school and expect at kindergarten that he's going to be learning at college degree levels. We have to do it slowly, and that's why these realities that we have, this physical plane is here, because this is where we come to experience the good, the bad, and the ugly, just putting it that way. So I think Steiner, is touching on all these areas. I would only say that from what little I've heard so far, it sounds to me as if he is adjusting to the consciousness in such a way that it could at least be able to be understood. But what he's talking about ultimately, in my opinion, is the focus and shifting of attention. And that's all that death is, that's all that astral travel is and soul travel. All these things are really the shifting of attention from your current place or what you perceive as your current place, and then shifting it and leaving it there for a period of time that, as the rule goes, there's the old philosophy that says, where the attention is, the body will follow. It must follow. And so these are old uh, philosophies and things and teachings that are eternal. That's basically the way things just work. And so keep your attention on something long enough, you're going to go there. Simple as that.
Well, and isn't it a beautiful concept to perceive the beauty in that these forces that we know as satanic actually were put here to develop our consciousness. So, for example, we have the persona of Satan, and theoretically, this character would suck all the juice out of a lemon, okay? Whereas Aramim would press that lemon and plasticize it. So in the last epoch, well, no, I don't want to say it that way, I'm sorry.
But if I may just interject before you go there, please. I'm sorry for interrupting. We have to keep in mind, or we should keep in mind, and if you go back to the Hebrew teachings and things like that, Satan is nothing more than the opposer.
Exactly.
That's all it is. You just have to realize that all this evil stuff that people assign to Satan are not necessarily evil. They're just metaphors.
All I know is this, Mr. Vic, okay, is that this whole mishigash of stuff is on account of the harvesting and stealing of whatever the human soul is. So, Satan has one interest in collecting souls, where Aramim, and this is a trip, check this out. So now we're back into kind of like the whole idea of the Roman Empire. Aramim would like to steal and collect souls and make a perfect plastic representation of humanity. So think of it like a big museum, and everything has been hard pressed there and represents a beautiful form.
That's interesting, you know. But I think you touched on something that was also interesting in that what is it that they're, you know, why are we going through this? And I think there are entities out there that actually can feed on the fear energy, whatever it is, that frequency that we give off. The more fear you are, the more this energy is produced, and the more the more fear, you know, they're going to want from you. So they're going to keep scaring you, and finally you're going to be, you know, so afraid you'll be petrified, literally.
Hey,
so,
oh, I'm sorry.
No, please.
You want to hear something? Oh, I just forgot. Now see, yeah, but it was about being scared.
In Florida, we call that a senior moment.
It is not. I see little children having them. It has nothing to do with that. Seriously though, being so terrified of something that is really a part of life. So I don't know, but I'm going to read you one more thing, and maybe I'll remember that scary thing, because I did have that brain fart. And forward and onward with Steiner. Okay, so he had an awesome book called The Outline of Occult Science. Another four-letter word to be terrified of, right? Okay, how intent anthroposophy is on creating a renewed understanding of the fact that the whole universe is suffused with soul and spirit, that human thoughts are connected with cosmic thoughts, human souls with cosmic souls, human spirits with cosmic spirits, with the creative spirituality of the universe. Anthroposophy aims at recreating the possibility of knowing the cosmos' spirit.
And what does he define as spirit?
Exactly. And see, so like right now, even though I know Steiner better than probably anybody around, I don't want to even try to say it yet. It's too big, and I won't come up with the right words. So I'm going to have to plead the fifth, Mr. Vic.
Well, for many years I struggled with that myself, and finally heard somebody say something. It was James and Wingmakers, and he said something about, well, the mind talks to us through symbols. Okay, I got that. And the heart through feelings. I got that. And spirit talks to us through action. And I thought, oh, and it was a bit of an epiphany, because then I realized, oh, so spirit is action. It's movement. In my prior path, this man by the name of Paul Twitchell, he referred to spirit as the ek, again, giving it a different name. And the ek is like electricity. It just flows and it maintains everything. Too much ek for you?
No, watch. Confirmation of spirit, phenomenon, progress. The thing that I forgot that would scare the piss out of us, was that there's energy to be stolen from stealing souls. The other way that these forces work, Mr. Vic, is through electricity.
That makes sense.
21st of 2015, that this passage really spoke to me. So it says, now let us recognize the fact that the factors accounting for the development of the religious and will impulses of recent centuries are the very same ones responsible for the direction and whole nuance of the modern life of learning. Only a victim of prejudice could believe and say that the modern way of knowledge has produced objective physics, objective mathematics, objective chemistry, that it is working towards an objective science of biology, and so on. That is pure prejudice. The real truth is that what we have drummed into us from about our 6th year onward is the product of externally influenced will and religious impulses that have evolved during recent centuries. The kind of learning that the world he wants to escape from has acquired can never satisfy a person with an interned will. Many an individual may come to realize purely instinctively that the life and practice he longs to flee received their present form from the fact that man believes only in what his eye sees and what his mind makes of his physical observations. Seekers therefore turn to the invisible supersensible realm as the basis of knowledge. Externalized forms of life and practice are outgrowths of a materialistic science, and a person impelled to regard these forms as subhuman rather than as fully human cannot feel suited by a science based on an exclusive belief in the external and material and what the mind concludes about them. Wow. Okay. Now, I promised that I would show you my Steiner collection. And so, just the titles again from what we're working with today. Awakening to Community, Initiation, Eternity, and the Passing Moment, The Tension Between East and West, and the next two that we haven't gotten into yet, but I'll give you a hint. The one is called The Seven Soul Types, and the other is The Human Life. So, over here, you see I have more of my Steiner collection, and this is how it went down. So it was between 2004 and 2005 when I stumbled into one of my favorite used bookstores And these books like jumped out at me. And of course, I'm not saying that they flew off the shelves. I'm saying there was a vibration that was coming from that place on the shelf. And so I walked over and I picked up a few and I went and sat down and started reading. And surely not each of the books that I looked at resonated with me, because these were way over my head, even though there was something at a subconscious level that told me I knew those words and I had heard them before, right? So over the course of a couple years, I went and bought every book that store had in the collection. And the way I came across such rare books is amazing. So there was a couple that had come over from Nazi-occupied Europe that set up here in St. Louis. You know, they escaped all the turmoil. They had a beautiful mansion and an extensive first edition Steiner collection. And as they got older, of course, they weren't able to maintain their home anymore. And they went to the bookstore and they said, we'd like to give this collection to you. And they had a requirement. They gave the books freely. But the requirement was to hold on to these books and make sure the right person got a hold of them. So it's an interesting story. As I was purchasing the books and getting to know the people that ran the bookstore, they told me that very story. And of course, I was the person meant to get the books. Now, oddly enough, I knew the person that wasn't supposed to get the books too, and it's not anything like it sounds. The husband and wife team that ran the Waldorf School in St. Louis here already had this entire collection, first edition, in German. So these people that migrated to St. Louis surely knew the Weslings and loved them. It's just that, what would they do with two first edition, copies? So, beautiful story, but that is how I acquired these books. In every one of the books, there is a beautiful golden seal. And these books come from the Library of Magdalena, Magdalena, Hausam, Hausam. So I'm sure that's the House of Magdalene, right? You can see that seal there.
Follow that trail as far as you possibly can to see what is actually behind it. And if you do that, then I think gradually one comes to have more confidence in one's ability to find these things out, and that confidence actually is much more self-enhancing. You feel more confident, and it's not the case that you feel more fearful. Many people feel fearful in the face of all of this overwhelming amount of information and so on. Yes? But actually, the more you actually get to know in this way, the more confidence that actually gives you, that you understand what's going on. And human beings tend to appreciate knowing. It's when we don't know things that the opportunities for fearful forces and fear-making forces gain entry into our souls.
These have been just a few of the many practical indications given by Rudolf Steiner in The Karma of Untruthfulness, and it is beyond the scope of this film to look at who these hidden manipulators are and what their aims might be. These questions are best answered by reading the books themselves and undertaking your own research, all the while testing the methodology presented here as to whether it is still relevant today.
I hope you enjoyed that video. I have found, I think, one of my new favorite Steiner speakers through this incredible blessing. You can find this video and more at a channel on YouTube by the name of Terry Boardman. TerryBoardman. Listened to one of his programs this morning, and I want to tell you that I really enjoyed this too. This is AV3, Terry Boardman, The New World Order and the Esoteric Dimensions. Incredible. So, I want to pick back up with more words from Rudolf Steiner. It says, but let us go on and consider something else. What I have been describing thus far might be called a reversing of human will impulses. A person is born into a certain period and educated to be a man of his time. The result is that his will impulses simply coincide with those of all the rest of the human world around him. He grows up, and as he does so, he grows without any great inner stirrings into the will tendencies of the surrounding population. It takes a deeply experienced inner revulsion against these habitual will impulses that he has adopted from the outside world to turn this erstwhile external will inward. When he does so, this reversing of the direction of his will causes him to notice the longings experienced so keenly in our time that wells up as though from eternal well springs, impelling him to seek a different belonging to the community of men that lay in the previous direction of his will. Now, everything has to do with the will and is intrinsically ethical and moral. What otherwise lives itself out simply as a matter of response to external imposed laws and traditional mores, and as habits more or less thoughtlessly adopted from the life around one. In other words, everything of an ethical, moral, religious nature that has developed in the course of one's growing up now turns inward and becomes a striving to make one's ethical, moral, and religious being a full inner reality. But it is not consistent with full human stature for a person to couple his life of will, and to some extent at least, his life of feeling, with the acceptance of just any haphazard type of knowledge. Now, I do want to say here, kids, that when Steiner uses the word religion, he doesn't mean organized religion like we know of today. So, for anybody that's wondering, because you hear me speak so much of this Creator God, I hold no admittance card to any religious dogma. So, Steiner, even though he speaks about Christ in great detail, as you explore, you will see that he also brings in every one of these other names of these great people that since time began, they've all been arguing about, well, who's who or who's God and you can't be God and all that stuff. So I just wanted to throw that in for you guys because it's not really anything to ever have a division over.